So this is chapter 19 on damages, and so the book kind of starts off with contract law in the summary, and talks about how damages can compensate non-breaching party for loss in a contract, and it talks about how this obviously is very helpful for some people, but also at the same time requires litigation, which can be very expensive and also time consuming. But let's get into it. So it talks about four main types, which the first is compensatory and you compensate the non-breaching party. So pretty self-explanatory. Two is consequential, and that one's more for like the future. I feel like you cover indirect or foreseeable losses. Three is punitive, and so you punish someone for the wrongdoing of the contract or breaching the contract, and whether that's paying or maybe going to jail or whatever that entails. Four is nominal, and that's so you recognize the wrongdoing with no monetary loss. So whether the people didn't lose money, but you can still see how you breached the contract. And so let's get into some of the other terms that it talked about. It talked about the mitigation of damages, which has to do with stuff like renting and also like employment. So like I know my parents have to deal with this with being in real estate, where you have to have a reasonable means in order to evict someone from your house, or like a renter. And also with employment, you can't just fire someone just because you don't like them. You have to have a real reason to do that. It goes on to talk about liquidated damages, which is self-explanatory with like liquidation. So you just pay a dollar amount for a future damage, or something that you've damaged, which in the book it explains a contract of a coach signed a 5-year contract of $300,000 a year. And so if he decided that 2 years in he wanted to leave, he would have to pay the school $900,000 because he already received his money from the contract and he won't be working there anymore. It talked about restitution, which is also pretty simple, I feel like. So you can return goods. This is super easy, like in the time we live in, to return online goods. Amazon makes it super easy. But if they're stuff like perishables, you go to Meijer or Walmart and you buy bananas, and then you sit them on your counter for 2 weeks, and then you try and return them. It's not going to happen because that's just not going to work or whatever, So also specific performance. So this is like for the performance of the act promised. The book talked about how someone bought a large plot of land to make a housing development on, and they realized that the land was not all suitable for building houses. So they ruled it, well, I think the court ruled against him because it wasn't specific performance. That is an example. Also, Reformation, not talking about Martin Luther here, but this is about rewriting a contract, which I guess 99 Theses rewrite, but that has nothing to do with it. And if the contract was imperfect to begin with. And then it talked about the quasi-contract, which is a court can act as if there is a contract in place, even if maybe the two parties didn't sign or write down a contract or even verbally agree on something. And there's a few things that go into that. Also, it got into waivers, and so that's pretty much a waiver is waiving something. So you can accept like the defective performance. Like a lot of people do this just to not go through a hassle and just to be like, get this over with. It's okay. You did a good enough job, even if it wasn't 100% complete. But it also says that this does, a lot of times it doesn't waive the subsequent or the additional future breaches of the contract. So it can just be just a piece of the contract. And it also ended the chapter with remedies for contracts can be very limited. And lastly, the limitation of liability. So this talks about, like it talked about this earlier in the book too, in earlier chapters. And this really depends on the breach and what kind of has been is going on in the contract. And so, yeah, that's chapter 19 and damages.